Hello and welcome to this week's vlog. This week we'll be reading reading a chapter from Richard A's Revolutionary Road. But before that, last week we had I picked a new book for August because I had finished the first one, and I ended up randomly picking Vampire Diaries. Now I didn't talk much about the book then because I was just overwhelmed with the idea of reading this book. I actually made up my mind the day I got it that I would read it last of all the books, but to pick it, I mean, there's two books in one basically, and this is the final part, the Fury and the Reunion. So this story starts with Elena's transformation into a vampire, Damon and Stefan, forcing themselves to work together. So far, what I've read, but I want to say that I watched the series when it was airing, back then, and it was the most exciting thing to me. That kind of whole, it was just exciting to me. I'm so grateful that they didn't make Elena in the show a blonde haired, blue eyed beauty because that would have just made her extra insufferable. So yeah, it's good. Let the heat come down from that character. But like reading the books, yes, she's that insufferable. I stopped watching the series when watching Elijah grab Klaus from that weakened state and flee out of the town, betraying all their subterfuge and their planning, that they took so much time to prepare, to kill Klaus so that the town will be free of this evil. Elijah wrecked it, and I don't know, it just made me give up on the show. I was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm stressed, I'm tired, this is not for me. I think at that point Elena had not transformed into a vampire, but then I started watching video essays about Vampire Diaries, and I learned that Elena would later transform into a vampire, which was like, oh, thank God I didn't watch that. Reading the book is a different experience in the sense that I don't know what to expect because I didn't watch the series up to this point, and it's not as annoying. It's not as annoying because now my mind about characters and storytelling is more about what the story has to say than my own bias of, oh, this person is annoying, like this character is annoying. I want to give the book a chance. Also, the show took a lot of liberties, changed every single character. Like Bonnie is not characterized on the show the way she is here. In the book, she's supposed to be this kind of meme that is going around now where the person that overthinks, the one that doesn't think at all, and the one that's worried about both of them. So, but like Bonnie is the one that has no thoughts, that doesn't think basically. She's spontaneous, and she doesn't even like her witch powers are something that look like an inconvenience to her. She's just a teenage girl living her life. She's just a girl. That kind of energy. That's what Bonnie has. And the way Elena and Meredith, that's the other part of. I don't remember if it was Meredith in the show, but there's still Caroline, but Caroline is not close knit with them as Caroline in the show. So like it's like the way they keep framing Bonnie as this very annoying, very childish, and it's like, Elena, you're not more mature than this girl. She's more honest about who she is than you are. Elena tries to view life as if, oh, I'm this adult. She acts like I'm an adult in a child's body, or I'm an adult in a teenager's body, and it's like it just makes it more obvious how immature you are. Like it's just interesting. I don't have any skin in the game actually, and I think the only part I'm having fun with is seeing Stefan and Damon's dynamics. Yeah, Stefan is so rigid, as usual. That's how he's in the show too. And Damon, he's not really. I'm not seeing much of him. Like I've not read much of him to be like, okay, Damon in the show and Damon in the books. You get so far, just on the superficial level, they are almost alike. But this Damon is more, as much as he's flippant about their human stress and human drama, he still has depth to him. Again, and it's so obvious, the triangle that is just glaring at you, the reader, in the face, like obviously. And Stefan's already like a bit resigned to it, even though he's still fighting with that. Elena is going to end up with Damon. And Damon is just confident that, of course, like he has this energy of like, he knows that she doesn't want to outrightly um like say that she likes Damon or she's excited by the attention Damon is giving to her. So he allows her to pretend like, what he does not affect her, but he keeps, now they have this telepathic connection. So it's like interesting to to read actually. It's not interesting that, oh, I'm trying the romance or who ends. No, I don't care about the story actually. And the chapters are so short. Like there are so many pages here. But before I even start the first line, I'm done. So that TikTok going around where somebody was like, oh, so many pages, so many words on the book, so many words on a page. Like that's my own those are the kind of books I love to get immersed in, because it just makes me feel like, oh, if I get lost in this one page or in this chapter, I would nothing would take me out of it easily. But this one, before I even spend, I mean, I don't think I can't time, I don't time myself, but I just realized now that it's not about the number of pages. Actually, the content, like the story, is just like there's a lot of spacing. The font allows for a lot of spacing between each words or each letters, and it's just like, okay, I don't know. And it's supposed to be like a two parts, the end of the series, like the Fury and the Dark Reunion. Actually, I started the Fury. I don't think I've gotten to the Dark Reunion yet. And I have an idea. The way the story is going is about this whole thing where there's another power is creeping up on them, and they have no idea what the power is, and they are all tense. This kind of teenage the height of teenage dramas. Like it's just what this book is. And I'm not at that point where those type of things excite me. It doesn't excite me at all, but it's interesting actually. I feel like, okay, I'm reading a book for August, so like, okay, let me just read, let me just have fun with it. So, and because it's easy to read, I'm not going to lie, it's very easy to read. I've been flying through the pages, I've been flying through chapters. The chapters are really short, and it's a type of cliffhanger type of thing where you say, and so we see what will happen this, and then next chapter starts, all those kind of predictable, very familiar kind of writing styles. So like I'm not pissing on it too much. I'm just saying the three things about the Vampire Diaries is that it's easy to read. It is pure teenage drama, and I have no skin in the game actually. So like, I'm actually excited. I might finish it before the month ends, which would allow me start a new book, which I'm very excited for. Oh. So enough of for laughing about this read. I just wanted to like give an update about how far and how my reading is going. Now, let's get on to the actual reading of the day, which is Revolutionary Road. Woo-hoo-hoo. I realize now that Revolutionary Road is not the kind of book I like. I'm just doing like this is the second book I'm doing, like I'm reading for this series. So I have like I'm just finding out. The more I do these videos, the more I discover how what I like, what I would like to read in this kind of format. And I feel like I would like to read like thrillers, mystery, suspense, a lot of crime, horror kind of stories. I feel like that would be much fun to read, like this series, because this book is something to be consumed, like just no pressure. I don't have any pressure reading it now, but like the whole idea of making videos, keeping up with the storyline. I don't know. It might be easy for you to keep up with the storyline, but for me, it's just like it's not something I think would be easily digestible, like with these weekly videos. But let's just continue. We're in chapter 6, and I don't know how many chapters are left, but the chapters are very long. Last week's chapter was so long. This chapter, if I if this chapter is as long as last week, I'd have to like stand up and get my water bottle, like seriously. And I don't know if I'm getting much more comfortable with my reading aloud. I don't know, I feel like it's way better than when I was reading what's that book, Reader's Digest, Hot Money. And yeah, so let's get on. We're ready for flat food, right? Like chapter 6. Can you see it? Chapter 6. So where we stopped at was Frank's whole job thing. Where we actually stopped at was Frank Wheeler taking the secretary, the naive young secretary, to a place where they can have an affair, sleep with each other. You know, he says he's taking her for lunch, but he's so frustrated by the way things didn't work out the way he wanted them to work out. So now he's just like, fuck it, let's do the damn thing. And maybe they can go take her to a hotel or a motel or somebody can just all her apartments, yes. So and but unfortunately in this plan, his co-workers had already seen him get into a taxi with her, which by this point I think the thing is already catching him too much. He doesn't care. So I wonder what happens next. Chapter 6. Everything's sort of going out of focus, she said. I mean, I feel fine and everything, but I guess we better eat something. They were in an expensive brick walled restaurant on West End Street, and Maureen had talked for half an hour in a breathless autobiographical rush. Cousin only wants to let him telephone Mrs. Jorgensen and arrange for one of the other girls to take the reception desk for the afternoon. The thing is, he had explained, I had to borrow Maureen to help me locate some stuff here in Visual Aids, and it looks like we're going to be tied up here for the rest of the day. There was no department or sub-department anywhere in the Knox building called Visual Aids, but we were reasonably sure that Mrs. Jorgensen didn't know it, and that anyone should be likely to ask would not be certain either. He had handled the call so adroitly that he didn't realize how close he was to being drunk until he came within an inch of upsetting a tray of French pastries on his way back from the phone booth. The rest of his time had been devoted to steady drinking and listening with mixed emotions. These were some of the things he had learned: that she was 22 and came from a town far upstate where her father owned a hardware store. That she hated her name. I mean, Maureen is alright, but group sounds so awful with it. I mean, that was one reason I was so crazy to get married. That she had been married at 18 and had it annulled 6 months later. It was completely ridiculous, and had spent the following year or two just moping around home and working at the gas company and feeling depressed, until it struck her that what she had always really and truly wanted to do was to come to New York and live. All this was pleasing, and so was the way she had slyly slipped into calling him Frank. And so was the news that she did indeed have an apartment with another girl, a perfectly adorable apartment right here in the village. But after a while, he found he had to keep reminding himself to be pleased. The trouble he gets was mainly that she talked too much. Okay, I have to say this, that Frank is very, how what's this word? Can I say it's facetious or something? It's facetious. Like, this is somebody who's planning to have an affair with, okay? And you are like, he's way older than she is, and I don't know. It's not something that like you want her to cooperate with you, like, yeah. But the thought that are going through his head, it feels as if she's the one, like he's some kind of, what do you call this? He's like in the market looking for a lover, and he's like going through the waters, testing everybody to see, oh, this one you're not good enough, this one you're not good enough, and he's like, bro, you're married with 2 kids. Like, I don't think you should be so prickly about her. It was also that so much of her talk rang false, that so many of its possibilities for charm were blocked and buried under the stylized ceremony of its cuteness. Soon he was able to guess that most, if not all, of her inanity could be blamed on her roommate, whose name was Norma, and for whom she seemed to feel an unqualified admiration. The more she told him about this other girl or gal, that she was older and twice divorced, that she worked for a big magazine and knew all sorts of fabulous people, the more annoyingly clear it became that she and Norma enjoyed classic roles of mentor and novice in an all-girls orthodoxy of fun. There were signs of this tutelage in Maureen's too heavy makeup and too careful hairdo, as well as in her every studied mannerism and prattling phrase, her use of words like mad and fabulous and appalling, her wide-eyed recitals of facts concerning apartment maintenance, and her endless supply of anecdotes involving sweet little Italian grocers and sweet little Chinese laundrymen and gruff but lovable cops on the beat, all of whom in the telling became the stock supporting actors in a confectionery Hollywood romance of bachelor girls in Manhattan. Under the oppressive weight of this outpouring, he had called for round after round of drinks, and now her meek announcement that everything was sort of out of focus filled him with guilt. All Norma's brittle animation had fled from Maureen's face. She looked as honest and as helpless as a child, about to be sick on her party dress. He called the waiter and helped her to choose the most wholesome items on the menu with all the care of a conscientious father. And when she had settled down to eat, looking up and down, looking up and then to assure him that she felt much better, it was his turn to talk. He made the most of it. Of course he did. Sentences poured from him. Paragraphs composed themselves and took wing. Appropriate anecdotes sprang to his service and fell back to make way for the stately passage of epigrams. Beginning with a quick, audacious dismantling of the Knox Business Machines Corporation, which made her laugh, he moved out confidently onto broader fields of damnation until he had laid the punctured myth of free enterprise at her feet. Then, just at the point where any further talk of economics might have threatened to bore her, he swept her away into cloudy realms of philosophy and brought her lightly back to earth with a wise crack. And how did she feel about the death of Dylan Thomas? And didn't she agree that this generation was the least vital and most terrified in modern times? He was at the top of his form. He was making use of material that had caused Millie Campbell to say, "Oh, that's so true, Frank," and of older, richer stuff that had once helped to make him the most interesting person April Johnson had ever met. He even touched on his having been a longshoreman. Through it all, though, ran a bright and skillfully woven thread that was just for Maureen, a portrait of himself as decent but disillusioned young family man, sadly and bravely at war with his environment. By the time the coffee came, he could see that it was all taking effect. Her face had become an automatic register of quick responses to everything he said. He could make it leap into delighted laughter, or frown and nod in solemn agreement, or soften into romantic contemplation. If he had wanted to, he could very easily have made it weep. When she looked briefly away from him, down at her cup, or off misty-eyed into the room, it was only for a kind of emotional catching of breath. Once he could have sworn he saw her planning how she would tell Norma about him tonight. Oh, the most fascinating man. And the way she seemed to melt when he helped her on with her coat. The way she swayed against him as they walked out of the place for a stroll in the sunshine made it clear that the last shred of doubt could be safely abandoned. He had it made. The only problem now was where to go. They were heading vaguely towards the trees of Washington Square, and the trouble with taking a walk in the park, aside from its waste of valuable time, was that this was the hour when the park would be full of women who had once been April's friends and neighbors, and Snyder and Susan Cross, and God only knew how many others would be there, lifting their softening cheeks to the sun, or wiping ice cream from the mouths of their children as they talked of nursery schools and outrageous rents and perfectly marvelous Japanese movies, waiting until it was time to gather up their toys and graham crackers and stroll home to fix their husbands' cocktails. And they'll spot him in a minute. Well, of course it's Frank Wheeler, but who's that with him? Isn't that funny? But he had scarcely allowed his uneasiness to develop before Maureen came to a stop on the sidewalk. "This is my place. Would you like to come up for a drink or something?" Then he was following her hips up a dim carpeted stairway, and then a door had clicked shut behind him, and he was standing in a room that smelled of vacuum cleaning and breakfast bacon and perfume. A high silent room where everything lay richly bathed in yellow lights from windows whose blinds of split bamboo had turned the sun into fine horizontal stripes of tan and gold. He stood feeling tall and strong as she ducked and curtsied around him in her stocking feet, straightening ashtrays and magazines. "I'm afraid the place is an awful mess. Won't you sit down?" And when she sank one knee into a studio couch to reach across it for the cord that opened one of the blinds, he moved up close behind her and put his hand on her waist. That was all it took. With a moist little whimpering, she turned and pressed herself into his arms, offering up her mouth. Then they were on the couch, and the only problem in the world was the bondage of their clothing. Twisting and gasping together, they worked urgently at knots and buttons and buckles and hooks until the last impediment slipped away. And then, in the warmth and rhythm of her flesh, he found an overwhelming sense of, this is what I needed. This is what I needed. His self-absorption was so complete that he was only dimly aware of her whispering, oh, yes, yes, yes. When it was over, though, when they had fallen apart and rejoined each other in a lightly sweating tangle of arms and legs, he knew he had never been more grateful to anyone in his life. The only trouble was that he couldn't think of anything to say. He tried to get a look at her face to give himself a clue, but she had clasped her head against his chest so that all he could see was the black disorder of her hair. She was waiting for him to speak first. He rolled his head a little and found he was looking through a crooked opening in the window blind, which she had managed to raise a few inches before falling into his arms. He studied the weather brick cornice of a house across the street, whose chimney pots and television aerials made intricate silhouettes against the vibrant blue sky. From somewhere high and far away came the faint crawling drone of a plane. He looked the other way into the room where everything, Picasso prints, Book of the Month Club selections, sling chair, mantelpiece bristling with snapshots. Everything swam in the vivid yellow light, and his first consecutive thought was that his flung coat and shirt were lying over there near the chair, and his shoes and pants and underwear were here, closer at hand. He could be up and dressed and out of this place in 30 seconds. Well, he said at last, I guess this wasn't exactly what you had in mind when you went to work this morning, was it? The silence continued, so complete that he was aware for the first time of the ticking of an alarm clock in the next room. Then, no, she said, it certainly wasn't. And she quickly sat up. She groped for the royal blue sweater and snatched it up to cover herself. Then, hesitating, she seemed to decide that modesty could hardly be said to matter anymore, and let it drop. But in a flurry of embarrassment, she picked it up again, evidently wondering if this wasn't exactly the kind of a time when modesty mattered most, and covered her breast with it again, and crossed her arms over it. Her hair was as unattractively wild now as it must have been in childhood. It seemed to have exploded upward from her skull into hundreds of little kings. Oh God, this is so icky. Why? Why? I don't like Frank. She touched it. Ugh. She touched it delicately with her fingertips in several places, not in any effort to smooth it, but rather in the furtive, half-conscious way that he himself had sometimes touched his pimples at 16. Ugh. Just to make sure the horrible things were still there. Her face and neck were pale, but a deep red blush had begun to muscle both her cheeks, as if she had been slapped, and she looked so vulnerable that for a second or two he was certain he could read her thoughts. What would Norma say? Would Norma be appalled at her for having been so easy to get? No, surely Norma's feeling would be that in a really adult, sophisticated affair, it was hopelessly banal to think in such terms as being easy or hard to get. Yes, but still, if it was as adult and sophisticated as all that, why couldn't she decide what to do with her sweater? Why was she having such an awful time thinking of what in the world she could possibly say to the man? Finally, she composed herself. She lifted her chin as if to toss back a smooth, heavy lock of hair, and wheeled her face into a drawing room comedy smile, looking him straight in the eyes for the first time. Do you have a cigarette, Frank? Sure, here. And at last, mercifully, the dialogue began to flow. What was the name of that department you invented? Hmm? You know, the place you told her would be Mrs. Jorgensen. Oh, Visual aids, I didn't really invent it. There used to be something called that down on the, I think, the eighth floor. Don't worry though, she'll never figure it out. It does sound wonderfully real. Visual aids. Excuse me a sec, Frank. And she skittered across the apartment, crouching awkwardly as if that would make her less naked, into the room where the alarm clock ticked. When she came out, wearing a floor-length gown and with her hair almost completely restored to its former shape, she found him fully dressed and politely inspecting the snapshot on the mantelpiece, like a visitor who hasn't yet been asked to sit down. She showed him where the bathroom was, and when he came back, she had straightened up the couch and was moving indecisively around the kitchenette. Can I get you a drink or anything? No, thanks, Maureen. Actually, I guess I'd better be cutting out. It's getting kind of late. Gee, that's right, it is. Have you missed your train? That's all right, I'll get the next one. It's a shame you have to rush off. She seemed determined to be calm and dignified, and she carried it off with elegance until the moment of her opening the door for him, when her eyes strayed to the corner near the couch and discovered that something flimsy and white, a brassiere or a garter belt, had been overlooked in her straightening up and still lay twisted on the carpet. She started she started, visibly fighting an impulse to run over and grab it and stuff it behind the cushions, or possibly tear it to shreds. And when she turned back to him, her eyes were pitiably wide and bright. It couldn't be avoided. He would have to put something into words. But the only honest thing he could say was that he had never felt more grateful to anyone to thank her, and he wondered if this might have exactly the wrong effect, almost as if he were offering her money. Another idea occurred to him. He could be sad and tender. He could take her by the shoulders and say, "Look, Maureen, there can't be any future in a thing like this." But then she might say, "Oh, I know," and hide her face in the coat, and that would leave him nothing to say but, "I don't want to think I've taken any kind of unfair advantage here. If I have, well, and that was the trouble. He would have to say, "I'm sorry." And the last thing he wanted to do, the very last thing in God's world he wanted to do, was apologize. Did the swan apologize to leader? Did an eagle apologize? Did a lion apologize? Hell no. I think, Frank, you need to walk into the nearest lake. Don't swim, just sink to the bottom of it and reflect on how big of an asshole you actually are. Like, homework for you, Frank. What he did instead was to smile at her, a subtle, wildly attractive smile, and hold his face in that position until she falteringly smiled back. Then he bent and kissed her lightly on the lips and said, "Listen, you were swell. Take care now." Oh, God. God. Can I say we've all been there? Like, maybe some people are very wise, though they've never made such a mistake with, like, a stinking old man. Like, I don't know, but like, I can say that to an extent, a lot of us have been there. So that's all I'll say. He was down the stairs and out on the street and walking. Before he had gone half a block, he had broken into an exultant run, and he ran all the way to the Fifth Avenue. Once he had to swerve to keep from stepping into a baby carriage, and a woman shouted, "Can't you watch where you're going?" But he refused. No less than an eagle or a lion would have refused to look back. He felt like a man. Oh, brother, this guy stinks. Could a man ride home with the rare smoker, primly adjusting his pants at the knees to protect their crease and wrapping his evening paper into a narrow panel to give his neighbor elbow room? Could a man sit meekly massaging his headache and allowing himself to be surrounded by the chatter of beating amiable husks of men who sat and swayed and played bridge in a stagnant smell of newsprint and tobacco and bad breath and overheated radiators? Hell no. The way for a man to ride was erect and out in the open, out in the loud iron passageway where the wind whipped his necktie, standing with his feet set wide apart on the shuddering, clanging floor plate, taking deep pulls from a pinched cigarette until its burning end was a needle of fire and quivering paper ash, and then snapping it straight as a bullet into the roaring speed of the roadbed, while the suburban towns wheeled slowly along the pink and grey dust of 7 o'clock. And when he came to his own station, the way for a man to alight was to swing down the iron steps and leap before the train had stopped, to land running and slow down to an easy athletic stride as he made for his parked automobile. The curtains were drawn in the picture window. He saw that from the road before he had reached the driveway. Then, when he had made the turn, he saw April come running from the kitchen door and stand waiting for him in the carport. She was wearing her black cocktail dress, ballet slippers, and a very small apron of crisp white gauze that he had never seen before. And he had barely had the time to switch off the ignition before she wrenched open the car and took hold of his forearm with both hands talking. Her hands were thinner and more nervous than Maureen Group's. She was taller and older and used a completely different kind of perfume. She spoke more rapidly in a higher pitched voice. Frank, listen, before you come in, I've got to talk to you. It's terribly important. What? Oh, so many things. First of all, I missed you all day and I'm terribly sorry for everything. And I love you. The rest can wait. Now come in, come on inside. If he had had a year to devote to it and nothing else to do, he couldn't for the life of him have sorted out and weighed the emotion that filled him in the 2 or 3 seconds of his lumbering to the kitchen steps with April fastened to his arms. It was like walking through a sandstorm. It was like walking on the ocean floor. It was like walking on air. And this was the funny part. For all the depth of his bafflement, he couldn't help noticing that April's voice, different as it was, possessed a quality that made it oddly similar to Maureen Group's voice, telling of the fabulous people Norman knew, or saying visual aids. A quality of play acting, of slight false intensity, a way of seeming to speak less to him than to some romantic abstraction. Wait here, my darling, she was saying, just for a minute till I call you. And she left him alone in the kitchen where the hot brown smell of roasting beef brought tears to his eyes. She handed him an old-fashioned glass full of ice and whiskey and disappeared into the darkened living room, from which now he could hear an ill-suppressed giggle of children and the scrape of a match. All right, she called. Now. They were at the table and he looked into all three of their faces before he saw what it was that bathed him in a flickering yellow light. It was a cake with candles. Then came that slow, shrill singing. Happy birthday to you. Jennifer's voice was the loudest and April's was the only one in tune when they took the high note. Happy birthday, dear daddy. But Michael was doing the best he could, and his was the widest smile. Wow. I don't know what am I supposed to say at the end of such a chapter. Like, what am I supposed to say? I don't have anything to say. This chapter, um, I'll call it succinct. You know, I think this is the first time that Frank has cheated on his wife with another woman by sleeping with her. But this is also the first glimpse of how, despite how much of an asshole he is, how loved, he is by his family. And I don't know what to say. I can't feel sorry for anybody but his family. Let's touch on his whole idea of being a man. Like, Frank needs to figure out what his real issue is. I feel like if he's able to figure out what his real issue, what he wants from life, I feel like he'll be a much happier, satisfied man. But then again, his whole thing is being a man, and being a man, the way it is implied from his setting and everything, the context of everything, being a man means not checking your head to see what is not working upstairs. It is more like just demanding your circumstances to twist around to follow everything that's the way you want it to go, you know, like being in control of everything at every time and controlling it to favor only you yourself as a man. That's what his own idea of being a great man or just being a man is. I like how short and sweet this chapter was. I hope you had a lovely time with me on this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for being here. Bye bye.